focus on the positive sides of history. They're still going to be historical about it. So they'll still talk about Ghadir and Saqifa. It'll still be heavily, let's say Shia history oriented. But they'll try to uplift the people in the audience. So they'll mention things like Fada'il of Ahlul Bayt. They'll talk about how great the Imams were. They'll talk about some of the battles like Khandaq and Khaybar. They'll talk about Badr and how the Imams were warriors. They'll talk about things like the virtues of the companions of the Ahlul Bayt. They'll talk about how great, for example, the daraja and the level and the maqam of Shias will be on the Day of Judgment and what we'll get in heaven, things like this. So it's almost like a very motivational speech, right? Like this is what you're going to get. And this is how good we are. This is how great we Shias are, right? That idea. So he said, no, did the Ahlul Bayt use this model? He said, yes, of course they did. Right? They would go around and they would share their fadila, their fada'il, their virtues with the people. But the question was, did they use this all the time? Did they always share their virtues and their characteristics with individuals? Did they always go around and tell people that, this is my station, this is how great Shias are? And we said, no, that's not how the history was. There were certain times and places for certain audiences where the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam would share their fada'il, but it wasn't everywhere. Right? There were other activities and other duties, wada'if, that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam had. So we had to keep that in mind as well. And the other critique we had was that this model is good only if it's combined with something else. Right? If it's by itself, then it won't lead us to spiritual success. If we're trying to spiritually grow in this month of Muharram and the month of Safar and year round, then simply hearing how good it is and how great it is to be a Shia, or simply hearing how great the Imams were, right, there might be, reward and sawab in it, that's fine, but that won't necessarily show us how we can improve ourselves. How can we be more like Ali al-Akbar? How can we be more like Hazrat Abbas? How can we be more like these individuals? If we hear practical principles, then we can have this practical application, we can be more like these companions. And that led us to our third model, which we said is an educational model for tabligh. It's an educational method that's being used in the mimbar and the majalis. And this was when individuals come and they try to share the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, the specific ways that we can improve ourselves, right? Beat shaitan, destroy our nafs, fight our ego, learn things about akhlaq, learn things about Islamic history or philosophy or aqaid, whatever it happens to be. So now with those 3 points in mind, for this last one we said, okay, but what's our evidence for this? How do we know that the Ahlul Bayt have encouraged us to use the mimbar for this purpose? How do we know that we should be using this as sort of a dars, right? Or almost like a class? How do we know that's the proper usage of the mimbar? So today, the few points that we're going to try to answer, the questions we'll try to solve tonight, and the problems we'll solve are: one, what's the evidence and support for using the majalis and the mimbar and these commemorations of Azah to educate people rather than only stir up emotions and retell the same history? So that'll be the first point. The second is, what did we discuss previously in the last 2 times that we were together in 2016 and 2012? What did we discuss then, and how will it relate to our topic tonight, inshallah? What were the general points and conclusions that we had there? And then finally, what we'll try to get to, inshallah, is what will we now discuss for the upcoming series, right? So we're going to introduce the topic for our series tonight, and we're going to try to answer the question of why this specific topic will be chosen. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala. So some people have an issue with saying that the mimbar should be used to teach individuals, right? They'll say, no, the mimbar, a majlis, is only meant to discuss the fada'il and the history of Ahlul Bayt, right? We shouldn't be discussing anything else. So they're more, let's say, a proponent of that second model, right? Just motivate us, show us how good our station will be in heaven, tell us how great the Ahlul Bayt are, and that's it. Don't do anything else. I mean, personally, I'll give you my own personal story. I was at a center, I won't say where, and over there, you guys, I think you're familiar with me, you know my style, right? You know which method I'm a proponent of. So I tried my method at one specific center, and the president of that center came up to me afterwards and said, listen, if you want a dars, don't do it in the month of Muharram. Don't use the mimbar for some sort of dars. Don't teach us anything. We have a very specific model for our majlis, for azadari. We're going to recite poetry. You're going to come in the mimbar. You'll tell us the fada'il. You're going to recite masa'ib and musibat. You'll come off the mimbar. We'll recite more poetry. Then we give out the baruk. That's it. Don't do anything else. If you want to do a dars, I'll give you a podium or I'll give you a table and you can do it after. But don't use Muharram time for that. Don't use the majlis time for that. I mean, I'm glad he was very blunt with me. That was kind of nice of him, I guess. He didn't hide. We have to answer. Is this the method that the Ahlul Bayt have encouraged? Now we said, talking about fada'il in history is good, but is it the only thing? So what is our proof and evidence and support for using this educational model as well? Now the first will be very simple, right? It won't be very difficult for us to understand. It's the words themselves from the Imam himself, Imam Hussein alayhi salam. If we're coming here for 10, 12 nights, 1 month, 2 months, however, and commemorating the tragedy of Karbala, trying to remember and recount and relive what Imam Hussein alayhi salam, his family and his companions stood up for. Well, we can make up our own reasons for why he stood up, or we can actually go back to his own words. Obviously, we would go to his own words. That makes the most sense, doesn't it? So what reason did the Imam give? Why did he rise up? Why did he stand up? Why did he leave Medina and then Mecca? Why did he travel to and end up in Karbala? What were his own words? He says, and I'm giving just a part of his statement, right, when he was leaving, was, إِنَّمَا خَرَجْتُ لِطَلَبِ الْأَسْلَافِ فِي أُمِّةِ جَدِّي. The only reason that I'm rising up, that I'm leaving, is for طَلَبِ الْإِسْلَاحِ فِي أُمِّةِ جَدِّي. I'm seeking, I'm trying to reform and do islah of the ummah of my grandfather, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. This is his own, he says, innama. Innama is a very specific phrase in Arabic. He said, this is the only reason I'm standing up. And then he continues, right? Uridu an amra bil ma'ruf. I'm rising to do amr bil ma'ruf, to tell and command people to do good, wa anha 'anil munkar, and to make sure and prevent them from doing evil. وَأَسِيرَ بَسِيرَةَ جَدِّي وَأَبِي عَلِي ibn Abi Talib. And I'm going to use the same model and travel the same path that my grandfather and my father traveled. The same seerah that they have, the same way that they changed the communities, I'm going to do the same thing. Now what did the Prophet and Imam Ali do? We know very well that besides talking about their own fada'il, which they did at times, obviously, besides recounting history of the past, which they did, they obviously had to educate their community. If we're talking about, and the Imam is saying, I'm trying to reform and do islah to correct my community, that means there's mistakes that the ummah is making, and the Imam is rising up to correct those mistakes. So now, the question is, these majalis, if the Imam stood up to reform the ummah then, don't we consider ourselves the ummah of Rasulullah? Aren't we the followers and the Shia of Imam Hussein? Don't we know that every day we're making mistakes, we're constantly sinning? And it's only because of the rahmah, the mercy and forgiveness of God that we're being forgiven constantly, that we're being given these opportunities year after year in the month of Ramadan, especially in the month of Muharram and Safar, to once again hear these stories so that our hearts soften, so that maybe we can reform ourselves. So that maybe when the Imam of the time comes back, we don't betray this Imam like those people betrayed the Imam. Isn't this what reform is about? Changing your actions, changing your intention, destroying your ego? If that's not what Karbala is, what else could it be? And if anybody can find anything else from the Imam, please educate me. Let me know if you can find something else. But this is very, very clear in the Imam's words. And I know all of you have been coming to these majalis for years and years and years. These words are nothing new to us. We've heard these words before. But sometimes it takes a while for us to, let it sit in our heart, to remind us that I'm here to reform. I'm here to make sure that I'm a Shia, a proper Shia, a follower of the Ahlul Bayt, in action as well as belief. Salawat ala Muhammad wa So how can we take the seerah of the Ahlul Bayt and actually, act upon it? Again, we're going to strengthen our evidence even more. Because some might say, okay, even though that was just the Imam Hussein alayhi salam's word, it's fine. What about the other Imams? Do you have any other evidence? I said, of course we do, right? Then this one comes from the 8th Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salatu Imam over here says, Rahimullahu abdan ahya amrana. May God have mercy on the abd, the servant or a slave, who does ahya of our amr, who revives, who refreshes, who renews, who reawakens and reinvigorates our amr, our matters, our affairs. Or we can even say our teachings, right? What the Ahlul Bayt stand for. So one of his companions who was in this gathering, a famous companion, Abu Salt, alayhi salam, he heard this, and of course he replied. He said, okay, كيف يحيي أمركم? How do we revive and renew your amr? How do we relive and revive and recount and reinvigorate your teachings? Qibla Rasulullah. So the Imam replies, first, يَتَّعَلَّمُ عُلُومَنَا. Learn our teachings, learn our sciences, learn the knowledge that we impart on individuals, number one. The second, وَيُعَلِّمُهَا النَّاسِ. And then teach it back to the people. First two statements are very, very simple. Learn and then teach. Learn and teach. فَإِنَّ النَّاسِ لَوْ عَلِّمُوا مَحَاسِنَ كَلَامِنَا لَاتَّبَعُونَا. If the people had heard the mahasin of our words, if they had heard the beauty of our words from the Ahlul Bayt, then they definitely do i'ta'at of us. They'd obey us and listen. And for many of us, sometimes we think that the month of Muharram is about converting people to Shiism. I'm not going to argue with that for now, because I don't think it's worth to argue, but let's just say that's your goal. Fine. The Imam is saying that the best way to do that is to share the actual Imam's words with them. Share the teachings of the Imams with them. Now, teachings of the Imams can be maybe their fada'il, fine, but there's so many other things that the Imams have said, right? If you want to take a few different statements and words from one or two Imams, I don't think we're doing justice to them. What about the times of the 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th Imam, where they spent so much time, not just with Shias, but with everybody, teaching them, especially the 6th Imam, right? How much of the Sunni world is in debt and owes their sciences because of the teachings of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam? This famous lines that we hear, Lola Sinatan, the Halik al-Nu'man, right? So one of the famous scholars of the Ahlul Sunnah, who was a student of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he said, if it wasn't for those 2 years that I spent with Ja'far as-Sadiq, I would have been destroyed. I would have had nothing. 2 years he spent with him, that's it. He had many, many teachers. But you see that the Imams didn't care so much who was coming to their gatherings. Their main focus, especially in the middle period after the Umayyads had collapsed, was to teach individuals. So where has that gone from our majalis and our gatherings? Right? Where have the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt gone? We have a good understanding of their fada'il. We know who they are. Right? We have held strong and firmly to their wilayat, and that's good. We need that. Because without that wilayat, our actions don't have as much value. We have that, that's good. But there's another part of the equation, right? Okay, now that we understand who you are, Ahlul Bayt, okay, now what are you trying to tell us? How do we actually get to a higher level? How do we make sure that we won't go through punishment in this world or the next world? How can we make sure that we're safe from the hellfire? How do we make sure that we can become perfect individuals? How do we make sure that we can be supporters of the Imam of the time? In the same way the companions were fighters and supporters of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. How can we ensure that? The only way we can do that is if we take the history, we take the fada'il, and we combine it with the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Salawat ala Muhammad. So the conclusion for this point is what? So today we should absolutely continue the legacy of Azad. Azadari should never stop. You might have some extremists who are trying to stop these movements, and it should never stop. These have started with the Ahlul Bayt, and they're sourced and incepted from the Ahlul Bayt. Their method was mostly historical and poetical and emotional, which is fine. Later on, the model took a different turn. Now we ask the question, what do we do today? We take the model that the Ahlul Bayt gave us, and we take the shortcomings that we have in our lives, contemporary issues, we combine both of these ideas, and then we have a true, perfect manifestation of Azadari. We can now truly mourn and inform ourselves without losing the memory of the Ahlul Bayt, because we need that memory. So anybody who, for example, wants to just do a dars or just teach, but not have the musibah and fada'il, or not have the poetry, then this is somebody that has lost the connection with the Ahlul Bayt. So we have to make sure both of those systems are there, right? So we have to make sure that in our gatherings we ensure this. So we want to cut out the negative aspects, but keep the positive aspects, right? We share the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, especially to address these modern issues, right? Which we'll mention inshallah. When we combine the historical approach and we take this emotional component, it softens our hearts as well. When our hearts are softened, we're more likely to listen to somebody, right? As an example, if let's say some random individual in this center, somebody who let's say is very harsh, they don't have good akhlaq, they come and they mention something to you, right? They tell you that, oh, you're making wudu incorrectly, right? And they try to teach you. how likely is it that you're going to accept their words? Right? If it's somebody that's been rude to you before, it's not a nice person in the community, right? They're just harsh all the time, they're rude, they're blunt, however it is, right? Kind of like me. If they're like that, no matter, even if they're giving you a fatwa from an actual book, you probably won't want to listen to them, right? Because bad akhlaq, having a bad demeanor, it rubs us the wrong way. So that emotional component softens our hearts first, right? Because when we have a harsh heart and our hearts, we kind of get stubborn sometimes, the musibah and the dhikr of Ahlul Bayt softens our hearts, right? It makes our hearts open and it allows our intellects to understand a bit more. Because understanding and learning is two parts. Your intellect is definitely needed. You need to have that rational component, but you need to have your heart involved as well. Salawat ala Muhammad wa So now what we want to do in the next few minutes is summarize some of the previous points we had made in the past two sessions we had been together. The first series we had together in 2012, we called From Muslim to Mu'min. We talked about there specifically what it means to be a Muslim. What is Muslim identity? We said over there that we're facing a big problem and a crisis in this country specifically, that many people don't know who they really are. They're abandoning their faith. They're abandoning Islam. They're forgetting what it means to be a God-conscious, a muttaqi individual. Why? Because the majority of society right now thinks that being religious, believing in God is something dumb, it's barbaric, it's irrational, it's illogical. You know, why would you do something like that? So now the norm in society is to not believe in God, is to not follow a religion. So we had to say that sometimes the reason our identities are weak, the reason that we forget about God and we don't want to learn more about the religion is because the usul al-din are weak. Our beliefs about theology are very weak. The reason maybe we don't want to pray or we don't want to fast or we don't want to be, improve our akhlaq or even come to these gatherings is because maybe we're doubtful about God in the first place. So the first thing after discussing our identity issue was, okay, how do we get it back? We should strengthen our usul al-din. We should strengthen our aqa'id and our theology first. Not using the Quran, not using the words of Ahlul Bayt. Because if we're going to be challenged by people right now, our classmates or our co-workers or sometimes even our friends and family, who let's say don't believe in religion anymore, they want rational and logical proofs. So what we did is we went one by one through all of the usul al-din. We started with Tawheed and we went through the rational proofs for the existence of God, right? We went through a few different types of proofs. Sallu ala Muhammad wa So we went through some rational proofs first. And we proved that God does exist. We can use science, we can use logic and reasoning, and we can arrive through many different proofs that there is one true, omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful God. Then we talked about other things like religion and science. What's the relationship between these two? That our religion should always trump science because, we talked about it in detail, I don't want to mention it again, but our science should never become religious, and our religion should never become completely scientific, right? We can use science to help us understand our belief system, that's okay. But we should never say, well, because there's no proof in science, it doesn't make sense, right? Because we have rational proofs for God existing, and we know that God, being all-wise, anything that he says has to be rational, it has to be logical. So even if science hasn't caught up yet, that's science's fault, not our religion's fault. Then we went through every single piece of the usul al-din. We talked about why God has to be just. We talked about the rational, logical proofs for why he sends down prophets, imams, and the scientific and rational and logical proof for why there will be a day of judgment and there will be an afterlife. So for anyone that, let's say, wants a refresher, we can talk, let's say, after the program, or we can speak separately, inshallah. This was our first series in 2012. Then we came back together in 2016. We said that simply knowing the usul al-din might not be enough. Now we went from Muslim to mu'min. A Muslim was somebody who just says on their tongues that they believe in God and the Prophet and all this stuff. A mu'min is somebody who actually acts upon what they believe. So now we said, okay, but are there different levels of iman? Because maybe some individuals, well, they pray, but maybe they don't pray on time. Right? Maybe they don't always wake up for Fajr. Or maybe they don't always do their 5 daily prayers. Maybe once in a while they skip something and then they make it up and do qada later on. Or maybe in the month of Ramadan, sometimes they fast, but not always, right? It becomes difficult for them. Or other sins. Maybe let's say they curse, or they swear. They listen to haram music, or watch haram movies or TV shows, things like that, right? We still have a lot of haram things in our lives. So how do we understand these different levels of iman, and how do we become more successful in our iman? So over there we talked about what it means to become a successful mu'min. We went through a few different characteristics based on a tafsir of Surah Mu'minun, chapter 23, if you remember. So we went through the first 8 or 9 different verses, right? So we said the first verse was Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Indeed, definitely the mu'minun are successful. After this first verse, then Allah mentions a few different characteristics of what makes a mu'min, what makes a believer successful. So the first point we talked about was, what should our idea about success be? Because in this day and age, especially in this country, in this society, some people have a materialistic idea of what it means to be successful, right? If you're not making 6 figures, if you don't have a huge house, or if you don't wear nice clothes, then some people say, well, this person is not successful. Whereas even those who are, let's say, very well off in this society has the largest cases of people taking antidepressants, right? Even though it might be the quote-unquote wealthiest nation in the world, supposedly, it's also the most depressed nation in the world. Whereas other nations, which aren't doing so well, maybe their GDP is not so high, they are much, much happier with that smaller amount of wealth, right? And if you go to especially places in the religious and Muslim and Islamic worlds, even people who have absolutely nothing. I mean, those of you who have been to Iraq, for example, during Arba'een, many people, they wait the whole year just so they can set up those stalls, right? Those amokib. They set up that stall. They have nothing throughout the year. They save up everything so that they can give out to the azadar, those who are walking. Let's say some fruits and some juice and some tea, some chai, or they can massage people's feet. Feet. This is what people wait their whole lives to do. They have absolutely nothing, yet they're dying for that moment, right? And they're completely happy doing so. Whereas for us, if let's say our phone breaks or we don't get something new, we get a scratch on our car, we lose our minds, right? First world problems, as we put it, right? So there's a whole different understanding of what it means to be successful. So we said, spiritually speaking, Islamically speaking, success is somebody who's looking towards the next life, right? Their akhirah gets built. They're thinking long term. Even if things go wrong over here, that's okay, because I know I'm trying to perfect myself to ensure that I get a good place and station in heaven. The second verse was الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ, having humility in prayer. The reminder here is that we have absolutely nothing. Everything that exists, everything that we've been given, every opportunity, every benefit, every barakah, every ni'mah, everything is because of God's mercy. If God had wanted to, He could, in every moment, just stop giving us existence and we'd be gone, right? We'd vanish. Even when we think that we're the ones putting in effort, that it's my intellect that's doing all the work, I'm the one studying, I'm the one putting in the effort at work. That brain that's working 24/7, that body that's running, all the systems that are running in your body, that's God making sure that those are working. So the best place that you can ensure that you're showing that humility is in your salah. And the action should stem from your heart. The third verse said, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ, people who keep away from lagh, things that are vain and a waste of time. A mu'min, a successful mu'min, keeps away from things which are not going to lead them to spiritual success. So he gave some tips on how we can take things which are normally, let's say, hobbies, like watching movies or playing games. We said we can even make these spiritual actions, right? We gave tips for that. Next verse, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِلزَّكَاةِ فَاعِلُونَ, those who are enactors or who pay or who do zakah. Over here, we took time and spent the discussion on how to do tazkiyat al-nafs. How do you purify yourself? Over here, we talked about how do you control your ego? How do you control your nafs? We said the more and more somebody disconnects from the dunya, you eat less, you speak less, you listen more, you are more humble, you listen to more individuals, you try to learn more, then your ego becomes weaker and weaker and weaker, and you become more and more connected to God. So you start to learn self-control. Next verse, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ إِلَّا عَلَى أَزْوَاجِهِمْ أَوْ مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُهُمْ فَإِنَّهُمْ غَيْرُ مَلُومِينَ فَمَنِ ابْتَغَى وَرَاءَ ذَلِكَ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْعَادُونَ. Over here, our discussion was about the concept of modesty and hijab. So first, we talked about what are the actual proofs for why hijab for both men and women is wajib. Then we talked about the difference between men and women, biologically and spiritually speaking. Why is it that women have to observe a certain type of hijab and men have to observe a different type of hijab? And we gave scientific and empirical evidence for the effects that hijab has on both men and women. Next verse, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِأَمَانَاتِهِمْ وَعَهْدِهِمْ رَاعُونَ. Those who stick to their word, right? Who stick to their promises. We talked about the concept of trust, right? When you have trust in your family, you stick to your word and your promises in your household, in your communities, at your workplace, everywhere. Then you build a stronger sense of community, right? People will be more likely to do favors for one another, to help out one another. You get a stronger bond between brothers and sisters. And the final one was وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَى صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ. Those who protect their salah, those who protect their prayers. And this is basically where we ended. And we asked the question that, why is it that, Allah in the beginning of this verse said, those who are humble in their prayers, and then here in verse 9 he talks about those who are protecting their prayers. Why is prayer mentioned twice? Why did he separate this idea? So he said this is something that we wanted to return to, inshallah. What is it? Why is it that salah has this kind of importance in the deen of Islam? So today I want to talk about why the topic of our series will be about salah specifically, and what we want to discuss, and why we chose this topic. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala So what I'll do quickly, just so we can go on to the musibah, is just give the reasons from the words of the Ahlul Bayt of why exactly salah, according to many, is the most important topic in discussion in the religion of Islam. Now we've said again, we're here, we're gathered, we come to these majalis. Why? Many of us, our connection to the Ahlul Bayt, our connection to Azadari, it takes physical form, right? Sometimes for us it's that cradle, that jula of Ali al-Asfar. Sometimes for us it's about the matam, or the tabarruk, or helping or supporting through our own funds. Sometimes for us it's about reciting poetry. Sometimes for individuals their connection comes through that parcham, right? Or that alam, that flag. The different flags of the ashab and the other Ahlul Bayt who are present. What is the significance of raising a flag, right? It shows you who you are and what you hold dear and important to you. Right? When we get to the fadila and musibah of Abu Fadl Abbas alayhi salam, we'll talk about this importance of what it means to be somebody who's wafadar, who's loyal, and how he held on to that flag to the last minute. Right? Because this is very, very important for us. Now, Imam and his companions, they rose up to save Islam, right? Because it was being destroyed and it was being taken away. It was being transformed into non-existence, basically. So our question is, on the battlefield, when the Imam and his companions went out, they each held their own flags, right? Representing themselves and representing who they were. They themselves were standing up to defend Islam, the deen, the religion. So our question is, as we're trying to say now, we're trying to stand up for the Ahlul Bayt, we're trying to revive their amr, their umur, their affairs, we're trying to learn from them, we're trying to understand how they revived and renewed the religion, how we can do that for ourselves. So we could ask, does the deen of Islam have its own alam? Does Islam have its own parcham? Does it have its own flag? We have a hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, where he answers this directly. He says, Alamul Islam as-salah. The flag of religion, the flag of Islam is the prayer, as-salah. And he continues, he says, فَمَنْ فَرَّغَ لَهَا قَلْبَهُ. Whoever completely gives his heart up to salah, you devote your whole self, your whole being, your dil to the prayer, the namaz, what happens? And you also have to what? وَحَافَظَ عَلَيْهَا بِحَدِّهَا. You protect its had. Had meaning the wajibat, right? You pray on time. You don't do things in salah which would break the salah, for example. He says, so وَحَافَظَ عَلَيْهَا بِحَدِّهَا وَوَقْتِهَا وَسُنَنِهَا. So you have to stick to the wajibat, don't do the muharramat involved with prayers and namaz. وَوَقْتِهَا, you do it on time, ideally awwal al-waqt, when it comes in right away. وَسُنَنِهَا, and the actual mustahabbat, the sunan of the prayer, the same way that the Prophet and the Imams prayed, right? The mustahabbat and keeping away from what was makruh in namaz. It says, if you have these three things, then what happens? This person, فَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ. Whoever does all of this, whoever gives up everything, make sure that they stick to the wajibat, muharramat, they do the mustahabbat, they keep away from what's makruh and not recommended, and they make sure everything's intact. Everything of their life, their heart is dedicated to prayer. this is a real mu'min. This is what the Prophet is saying. Second piece of evidence is the final words of the Prophet. According to some pieces of history, they say this was the last words of all the prophets of Islam. But specifically here, we're talking about the last words of the Prophet when his head was in the lap of Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. And they say that his last 3 words to the Imam were as-salah, as-salah, as-salah. Now, why would he have to tell somebody like Imam Ali, Mulay Muttaqeen, about salah? Imam had no problem with his prayers. Perhaps this was a message for us, not necessarily for the Imam himself, because he knows the Imam, who is Mulay Muttaqeen, Amir al-Mu'mineen, if we're trying to be his followers, his Shia, he has to raise that same flag that the Prophet raised, right? Alim al-Islam, as-salah, that same flag. So he's passing that same flag on to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And now Amir al-Mu'mineen has to carry that on as well. Now, who is it that had to have an arrow pulled from his foot in the middle of a battle, right? Because he was in Salah. You guys know the story, right? This was our second piece of evidence. Our last piece of evidence here is that it's a prerequisite for other actions to be accepted. It's the most important amal that we can have. And I'll give you the analogy here. So let's say you had to apply for something, right? Or let's say you had to take a test. And while you're taking that test, at the beginning it says you have to fill out your information, right? Your name, date of birth, address, all of this stuff. And then it says, if any of this above information is incorrect, no correct answer, none of your tests will be accepted, right? So even if you get the whole test and exam right, if any of your information above is false or incorrect, it's not going to be accepted at all, right? Your whole exam will be thrown out. Salah has the exact same value with us. In Islam, if your salah is accepted, everything else becomes accepted or can be accepted. If it's not, then everything else is thrown out the door. And this we have directly from the words of many of our imams. I'll give you one version of the hadith which comes from our 6th Imam, Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, "Inna awwala ma yuhasib al-'abd as-salah." The first thing that we're going to be done hisab, the first thing that we're going to be held accounted for on the Day of Judgment is as-salah. That's what we're going to be asked about first. فَإِذَا قُبِلَتْ قُبِلَ سَائِرَ عَمَلٍ. If this is accepted, if Allah does qabul of our namaz, our salah, everything else, the side, the other amal, they're going to be accepted as well. What's the other side? إِذَا رُدَّتْ رُدَّ عَلَيْهِ سَائِرَ عَمَلٍ. If this is rejected, if Allah sends it back and throws it back in our face, saying this is not a real namaz, this is not a real prayer, everything else will be rejected as well. In the Quran itself, we know, إِنَّ صَلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ. Salat itself has this opportunity and this ability and power to push us away from the other evils in the world. Right? All this fahsha, these kind of indecencies and evils, and all the other bad things that we don't want in our lives. Salah is the key to make sure that we can push it away. So some people say, well, I pray namaz, I'm praying, but I'm still sinning, right? I still get involved with indecent and inappropriate behavior. So, na'udhu billah, is the Quran wrong? No, your prayer is wrong, not the Quran. Your prayer is not a real prayer. Your prayer is not the same one that the imams did. It's not the same one that the Prophet was talking about, for huwa mu'min. Our prayer is not the prayer of a mu'min. And this is what our topic will be then, inshallah, is what exactly is the salat of a mu'min. So what we'll do in the next few nights, inshallah, is go through each and every part of salah, try to break it down and give us a greater understanding and clarity. Why exactly do we raise our hands in adhan, for example? Why do we keep our hands like that? Why do we do that for takbiratul ihram? What are these words that we're saying? Why are we bowing, right? Why is wudu performed and wiping these hands? So a lot of the philosophy of the rulings we're going to try to discuss, inshallah. In addition to that, if we have time, we'll try to mention some ahkam and rulings as well. Because it's always good. I know many of you have gone through these, but it's always good to refresh our memories. And I guarantee, every single person, I guarantee at least one thing will be new for you. Even myself, when I go through the books and classes, there's always one point that I'm like, I read that before, but I completely forgot about it. Right? There's something new that we should always learn. And if we want to try to pray like a mu'min, pray like Amir al-Mu'mineen, we have to make sure we're following those hadd, right? The limits of the salah. We have to make sure we're doing the proper wajibat and keeping away from what's haram. And we should also strive to make sure we're doing what's mustahab in prayer what's recommended and keeping away from what's makruh. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala alihi. So let me just conclude what we talked about today, then we'll move on to the musibah inshallah. We said first that we should use these majalis to educate, improve, and reform ourselves. Since this was the original intent of the uprising and qiyam of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. This was his mission, to reform the ummah. This is the way that we can revive the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, is to learn more about what the Ahlul Bayt taught. So we're going to look at, inshallah, the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, specifically about our namaz and salah. We said in our previous discussions, we talked firstly about our identity, how we have to get closer to Allah, right? Solidify our tawheedi and monotheistic identity here, become more God conscious. We should have a rational understanding of why we believe in things in our religion. If we don't understand it, we should ask questions. Having doubts is okay. Our ulama and scholars encourage asking questions. And inshallah, from tomorrow, I believe that they'll be using the screen. So hopefully, live, we'll be going through some of the questions. But for tonight, inshallah, Qarab Bhai will be giving me the questions if anybody did post them on the. And you gave the code or no?
Yeah, I gave it.
Okay. What was the code, just so I can?
806.
806. So if you go to slido.com, SLIDO.com, the code number there you put in is 806. And over there, anonymously, you can put in your questions. It'll be there. And then Qarab Bhai will share them with me. And then either in the lecture itself or afterwards, we can discuss it, inshallah. And if anybody has either anything privately they want to discuss, that's also an option as well. You can discuss and mention to one of the board members or come to me afterwards. So having these rational proofs is very, very important. After that, we talked about, it's not just about having belief, you have to have actions behind your words as well. How we do that, we went through the various things about being self-controlling, destroying your ego, humble while praying, not wasting our time, purifying ourselves, observing Islamic modesty, the different types for men and women, being trustworthy and sticking to our word, right, with everybody, right? And then striving to improve our prayers, which is going to be our discussion for the next few nights, inshallah. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala alihi. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala alihi. Last night we mentioned that the caravan of the Ahlul Bayt and the companions of the Imam left Medina, Madinatul Munawwara, this enlightened and illuminated city. They first left their hometown, right, where they grew up, right? They had all these fond memories. And I mentioned this advice for all of us, but especially those who, let's say, have trouble connecting with the musibah and this second part of the lecture, which is recounting the history of the Ahlul Bayt and the tragedy of Karbala. Said, for us, we should put ourselves in their shoes as best as we can. Close your eyes if you want to, put your head down, and put yourself in that position. How would I feel if I was put in that same position? Imagine now, this family, right, these kids, women, children, they're leaving their home where they grew up. How many of us have had to abandon our homes before? And normally when we leave our home, we always look forward to coming back, don't we? You leave your home, you leave your city, you leave your state, you leave your community, you leave your home country. You're away for a long time. Your heart is always being pulled back to where you first came, where you first grew up. And this is how the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, this was their connection to Medina, right? Even when mu'mineen, I know those who have gone for Hajj or Umrah, when you go to Medina, there's a different feeling there that you don't get in Makkah. You feel a certain connection to Ahlul Bayt there, especially at Jannatul Baqi, right? There's a different kind of connection that your heart has to the Ahlul Bayt. People normally can't wait to get back to their hometown. And this perhaps was, I'm sure, the same feeling that the Ahlul Bayt had when they left Medina. We can imagine, for example, a young Sakina leaving her room, turning back thinking, I should be back to my room soon, being able to play outside like I used to, being able to play with my brother and my Ammu Abbas like I used to play. I'm sure she's thinking, when she's walking out and seeing the city walls of Medina, that I can't wait that after we travel, I'll be able to come back, right? And spend time with my little brother Ali al-Asghar again and play with him. They say though, that this wasn't what actually happened. When the caravan of Ahlul Bayt, they came back to Medina, they weren't looking forward to coming back. When they went from Sham, after the tragedy of Karbala, when they came from Sham, they ended up and they stopped outside, in the outskirts of Medina. When they say, according to some, when Bibi Zainab took a look at the walls of Medina, of her hometown, the place where she grew up, the place where she was with her family, the place where she was with her friends, the place where she was treated like a princess. When she looked back over there, they say the first thing she did is she fell off of her camel and began to weep and cry. She said, when we left you, Ya Medina, when we left you, I was with my brother. We were with our fathers, we were with our brothers, we were with our sons, we were with the men. And now we come back to you, Ya Medina, with nothing but women and children. Now Imam Hussein makes his move. He leaves Medina. He ends up in Mecca. He's asked and forced to give bay'ah. He leaves again and goes from Mecca and makes his journey towards Kufa. We know the history that he's stopped and then he's taken towards another land. As he's being taken somewhere else, the narrations in history, they tell us that when Imam came to one specific spot, they say his horse wouldn't move forward anymore. Dhul-Jannah stopped right there and wouldn't go forward. The Imam tried over and over again to get Dhul-Jannah to go, but he wouldn't move. So the Imam thought that maybe it's Dhul-Jannah, maybe he's tired, maybe he doesn't want to go forward. So some historians say that he asked for another horse. So they brought a second horse. Imam got on top of the horse and tried to move. This horse didn't go. He asked for another person's horse. Another companion brought their horse. Imam sat again and tried to move. The horse wouldn't move. Some historians say 7 horses came and 7 times they wouldn't move. It's as if these horses knew that this is exactly where you have to do your inzal. This is where we must stop and have our qiyam. Imam Hussein knew then that there's something special about this land. He called the local tribe, Banu Asad. He said, what is this land called? And they gave them different names. And then finally, one of the elders of the tribe said, there's an older name that we used to call this, that this is the land of Karb wa Bala. This is the land of trials and tribulation, of pain, of suffering. Imam Hussein alayhi salam responds, says, yes, this word, this name, this land is where we have to stop. He told Abbas, put our tents down here. This is where we're stopping. Don't you know, Rasulullah before I left had mentioned this same place to me. He said, this is the place where your blood will be shed. This is the place where you'll have to give your life for the sake of Islam. This is the place where your family will be slaughtered. Your son will be slaughtered. Everybody will lose their lives in order for you to save the message of Islam. Imam Hussein asked the elders and the tribe leaders of Banu Asad to come. He said, who does this land belong to? He said, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, this belongs to us, Banu Asad. He said, I want to buy it from you. He said, no, Ya Rasulullah, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, we're going to gift it to you. He says, no, we have to buy it from you. Fine. They sold him the land. He bought that specific plot of land in Karbala. Then he gifted the land back to them. He said, I'm gifting this land back to you. But there's some shart and shurut, and there's some conditions that I'm going to give this gift, this land back to you as a gift. He said, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, what do you ask of us? What do we have to do? He says, listen, very soon an army will come here. And more soldiers will gather. And our blood will be shed and our bodies will be left in the hot sands of Karbala. All we ask for you, O men of Banu Asad, is that after these enemies have left our bodies, after they've left our bodies without burying us, you come forward and you bury our bodies. And they said, Na'am, of course we'll do this for you, Ya Ibn Rasulullah. But Imam Hussein knew that they probably wouldn't stick to this. So he says, now you go and call your women here. He called the women of Banu Asad. He said, Ya Nisa Bani Asad. He said, your men will betray. They won't follow this. They won't bury us. So I'm asking you, when you go out, like you do every day, when you go to the river Furat, when you go and gather water for your house, for your households, bury our bodies then, right? Don't wait. You know, you can wait. Don't come out when the army's there. Wait some time. When you go get water, then you can bury our bodies. He said, of course, Ya Rasulullah, of course we'll do this for you. Then he sent away the women. He says, but I know that the women won't stick to their words, so he calls the children of Banu Asad. He comes, he bends down perhaps, and he's talking to the children of Banu Asad. He's saying, listen, when you go out, you know how you play in the sands? When you're going out and you're playing by the river Furat? He said, I know that you can't bury me. I know that's too much for you to ask. As you're playing with the sand, just take a few bits of sand and throw it on top of the different bodies that you see here. This is not much. لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to forgive all mu'mineen, mu'minat, all of our marhumin and marhumat, all Muslimin, Muslimat. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to put us on a path where we strengthen our identity. We try to renew and refresh ourself, our iman, and bring our identity closer to the message of the Ahlul Bayt, especially the message of Imam Hussein, and we work in these nights to reform ourselves. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad to give us a station so that when the Imam of the time returns, we don't disappoint him. Ya Allah, we ask you to hasten the return of the Imam of the time, make us his helpers and supporters when he comes. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ya Hussein.
सताएंगे तुम्हें आदा सकीना हम नहीं होंगे ये कहते थे शहे वाला सकीना